We are back, and probably worse than ever.
I had to sell my.
I mean, we are talking about Sony, so obviously.
Oh,
Toby.
Oh man!
3 people just lost.
Well, I mean, I get to talk the most trash about Sony because I am a Sony shooter.
Right.
Those of you guys who watched one of our more recent episodes will know that this one has some issues. Brandon,
can you hold it closer? Hold it closer to the camera.
Well, not sure.
I mean, it's on the thumbnail. It's on the thumbnail.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there it goes. There it focuses.
There.
We put a screen protector on it so we wouldn't cut our fingers while in use.
Right.
Oh, is that what happened to my fingers?
Here's an A7 IV. There's an A7 IV. I've got that, actually quite.
What's that fat lens on there?
It's the 35 Rokinon 3514 with. So it's my 3514 with Brandon's MC11 adapter with our shared A7 IV.
A little insane.
Then over here I have Kemper's Christmas gift. It's early.
Ooh.
Go check out last week's show. It's the Nikon F4.
Well,
the lens is not part of.
There wasn't a show last week. We should probably address that problem. That in the
you understand everything.
In the Thanksgiving holiday, we were unable to all get together. It was
Brandon's fault.
Issues.
I'm just gonna say it.
It was Brandon's fault.
It's always my fault, honestly. Like, I'm not even gonna try to cover that up.
And Brandon's like, no resistance here.
Although I will say, Kemper's fault for us being on a Thursday this week and not a Wednesday.
That's true. Sure. Well, as my daughter had a birthday yesterday, and we threw her a party, so putting my family first, such a terrible thing to do.
Yeah, Kemper.
Although, honestly, if you guys could let us know, like our regular watchers, listeners, like what day is the best for like to do this? We just started on Wednesday and now it's Thursday. We're going to drift around. And then next week, who knows what's happening, because we are going on a summit bid mission to California and we're ramped.
I wonder if we can live out in, like, maybe on our phones or something, even for a brief second, just to keep people updated.
Would you guys like that? If we live, we can absolutely YouTube live from one of our phones if we have streaming service. So we might be in the field next Wednesday.
Or we could do it off of a hotel Wi-Fi. See if that works.
That's somehow scarier.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's just stick to the 5G or whatever we have.
So we are going to the Alabama Hills area, the Lone Pine area of California. I say Colorado so often, but it's actually California. Yeah.
Normally Colorado.
And we're going to be, some behind the scenes, we're going to be shooting an in-depth review of this camera, the Nikon Z9. And we're going to be shooting an in-depth review of Brandon's camera, the Canon R3. And Toby's camera, the Canon R5C. It's going to be review craziness. So
it is. I can't show my camera because you're looking through it at the moment. You look at me, you're looking at the R5C.
So this is the Nikon Z30. That is my new live stream camera, whatever. I like it. It's a funny little camera, but I actually really like it so far. It has no viewfinder. It has no viewfinder, which is weird.
Oh, it doesn't?
I'm sorry.
Actually, I don't know if I need that.
No, it has no viewfinder. It has a great back screen. It's nice for what it is, but it has no viewfinder. It's very kind of, I would say, video vlogging focused. You know, it's nice. I wish it was 10-bit. That's my biggest issue with it, is that it doesn't have a way to have it be 10-bit. So, but other than that, I'm enjoying it. And for like a little utilitarian, like capturing B-roll or stuff like this, for just leaving it on the tripod so live stream. It's a great camera for that. So
Indeed. And Brandon, what camera are you using?
The 2019 MacBook Pro. Yeah.
do you want to tell them where you're at? You're actually in Denver, Colorado instead of
Yes,
Minneapolis.
I'm Colorado. Had to put a bit of a makeshift setup together.
Wow, it looks better than your normal one.
Hurtful. Probably not wrong, but hurtful. But don't worry,
And you were also on super shady internet. So if we drop Brandon, then it's because his shady internet didn't hold up.
Kemper decided to kick me. He's like, "Oh, this guy again."
Yeah, no. His opinion is irrelevant. Yeah.
Like, I'm actually really curious about Brandon on today's show because he's traditionally our Sony fanboy, straight up Sony sheep all the way. He's been herded by Sony for many years. And he recently broke up with Sony. So I don't know. Like, is there going to be salt? Is there going to be salt?
No,
Is
Is it
going to be good? Is it going to?
I think it's honestly. I think my true opinion is it's hard to hate any of the top 3 companies right now. Yeah, there are critiques of each of them, but like they're all like the cameras we have now compared to the one that Adobe has, not the Sony, the other one from 1993 or whatever it is.
1988 on this.
1988. That's a lot of technology advancement. Let's put it that way.
Indeed. And then we also have this Leica 2006 over here.
Nothing will be better than that, though. That's a Leica. So
it's a Leica.
Nothing could possibly
Leica impossible for it to be worse.
Yeah, very Leica for anything. Just people can finish that in their heads. Whatever
we just lost people. No,
we actually did.
So, yeah, well, I mean, I guess we can maybe, well, I think before we start on State of Sony, should we address the huge camera news out there right now that the R5 Mark II is coming in 2023? We, on our last show, the State of Canon, we said that we did not think this was going to happen. Well, we kind of wandered around whether we thought it was or not. It seems like it's happening.
Yeah, like in some ways it seems on track. Like we were talking about the 4-year release period and stuff like that.
Right.
And the R1
seems off the table for next year. And spec-wise, it's kind of neck and neck with the Sony A7R5, which I think is very interesting. 61 megapixels. What are some of the specs on it? I actually need to look at it.
So what they're saying right now, this is rumors. 61 megapixel backside illuminated sensor, which would be a that's at least not super common with Canon.
No, I think the R3 is their first one that did that.
The R6 Mark II have a BSI? It didn't have a stacked. I know that was super controversial.
I don't know. I wish I knew, but I don't know.
Dual Digic X processor, 30 frames per second with tracking, 12 frames per second mechanical shutter. So we know it'll have a mechanical shutter. Same 8-stop IBIS, which means you'll have the in the corners. Making your viewers throw up. New high-resolution modes similar to pixel shift found in Sony and Fujifilm, so that'll be useless, just like it is on Sony and Fujifilm. Just kidding. Maybe.
I mean, what if Canon? I don't know.
2x, 4x, and 8x digital teleconverter. That's the funny thing about these rumor specs. It's like random stuff that no one is terribly. It's just cropping into the sensor. But I mean, it is 61 megapixels, so it's a very croppable sensor. So it makes sense that Canon would want to make a big deal about that. Same dual pixel CMOS AF2 from the R3 and the R6 Mark II. That's clutch. Internal 8K 60 video recording, 8K raw video spec to be confirmed. So we don't know about the raw recording. Internal 4K up to 120 frames per second, full HD up to 240 frames per second. Those are two heavy hitters for sure. It's going to be a much better slow motion camera than the Sony A7R5. Focus breathing correction for video, catching up with Sony there. New overheating prevention design similar to the R6 Mark II with at least 40 minutes of 8K video. 60-minute record limit in 4K video, so they aren't necessarily full sending fixing the overheating. It appears they're adding record limits, I guess, to try to mitigate that. Dual
we don't
CF
know. We
Express
don't. Like I
Type
said, it's just
B.
rumor.
Indeed, this is still just rumor stuff. Dual CF Express Type B card slots. That would be big.
That's huge.
If they chose to do that instead of an SD
if they chose
card.
to do that. I don't know whether you saw, Toby. Edward Scott shared with us on the chat that R6 Mark II is not BSI.
Is not BSI. Okay.
So it would be the R5 Mark II and the Canon R3 would be Canon's sole BSI sensors. So very interesting. So what are you guys' thoughts? Like it being so similar to the, what's up?
There are just like a couple more stuff for Canon shooters that would be important. Like a standard HDMI port would be huge. And then a new designed vari-angle LCD monitor optimized for video shooting. I don't totally know what that would mean.
I don't know what that means.
And then launch time Q2 of 2023. So like summertime-ish. So not
similar
that
to the
far
R5
off.
Mark I. Yep.
That would probably work well for me picking up one.
Yeah, for sure.
I think like that'd be about the time I'd want a second body anyways.
So it seems not dissimilar from the Sony A7R5. Is this what we thought the R5 Mark II would be?
I'm just very sus of this. I know that Canon Rumors thinks this is the specs, but it's really weird. Canon almost always has a different megapixel, like around the same as everybody else, but it's slightly different. So I'm very surprised that it would be the same as the A7R5. And honestly, it's just like an A7R5, but like a little better kind of in every category. Like I guess that's I'm biased because I'm looking at it from a video perspective and it has some better video specs, but
I was gonna say I think it actually looks pretty on par, and actually maybe the A7R5, like Sony A7R5. Oh, I guess I said the A7.
Yeah.
Is maybe better. Like it depends on autofocus and stuff like that. Like what they're doing with that. I don't know.
Yeah.
I really don't.
It seems extremely similar. And interestingly enough, we've had some rumors since our Nikon show that the Z8 is looking to be extremely similar to the A7R5 as well. So it seems to be this 61 megapixel 8K camera is super important to all three companies. And I think that's interesting. Like obviously high megapixel is important, is become more important in the last few years. And it seems like that's kind of the arms race right now is to get that camera out for all three companies, because by the end of next year, it looks like we'll have that. I mean, the Nikon, we don't know for sure it's going to be 60 megapixels. It could be still in the 40, 50 range. We don't know. We don't have hard, fast rumors, but Nikon rumors stated that it's going to be very similar specs to the Sony A7R5. So I would assume that means 60 megapixels. So yeah, very interesting.
What do you think makes the Sony A7R5 a better camera than the rumored R5 Mark II based off of these specifications, B. Wooler?
I was just gonna say more about the AI autofocus. I don't really know what. I don't completely understand what that entails, but I'm thinking that there could be something with that. Then there's always this kind of you're choosing your own battle with between specifically right now Canon and Sony. With you want to be able to have more, you want more noise in the shadows or in the highlights. So, and that's not a better or worse. It's just Canon has better highlight like retention and Sony has better shadow retention. In my opinion, I guess I think that's probably pretty like that's pretty.
I mean,
not
I think
scary.
that's generally agreed upon. I mean, that's been my experience for sure.
And
Is that I
especially
get
in
a little
video, I
bit
think.
more out of the highlights with Canon. Well, I mean, I don't know. I also just feel like in general, Sony and Nikon, I get slightly more dynamic range. You
Yeah,
know, it's become where it's like it doesn't matter that much anymore.
yeah.
I
If you're
feel like
like
the
in the
R5 was
ballpark,
close enough, and certainly the
yeah.
R3.
But I think the shadow highlight thing still kind of that could be something where it's not really. I guess it's not making one better, but what battle you want to choose, I guess.
Yeah,
So
yeah, for sure. So yeah, I think it's interesting. I don't know quite totally what to make of it all. That this is the camera everybody's trying to get out right now, and I feel like if I were Canon, I have a hard time not feeling like the flagship's more important, the
oh yeah,
actual flagship that keeps up with the A1 and the Z9. But I could be
80
totally wrong,
megapixels.
and surely, certainly from sales volume perspective, they're going to sell many more R5 Mark IIs than they're going to sell an R1. You know, I just look at it from a perspective of professionals using it. I don't know.
Well, I will
And to be
say,
on, oh, go
oh,
ahead.
sorry, I was just gonna say, in terms of professionals, the R5 Mark II might be a big deal for second bodies. So the R1's really important as maybe a primary, but if you're content-ish with the R3, the R5 Mark II might be more important as a second body, and then
Well,
an
I
R1.
think even as a primary for professionals, I mean, like, look
Well,
at it
yeah,
compared to the A1. I mean, the FPS might not be quite there, but it's got they're saying dual digit X processor, so it has twice the processing speed of the original R5. Like,
which yeah,
it's
that
going to
should.
be able to handle a lot of, it's going to be a fast camera, I
Mhm.
think, and a powerful camera. So if that's true, and again, I agree with Toby. I mean, it's interesting. I wonder why Canon rumors this far out is like this is CR3, but they were right about the original R5 and nobody believed them. So
Well, they might be, trying to again kind of make sure people don't switch over to Sony for the R5, which I don't know exactly why people would do that right now, but it might be a little bit of crowd control in that way.
yeah,
Maybe
yeah,
I don't
Like a convenient leak.
know. A
yeah.
convenient leak.
A convenient.
Right.
Oh yeah, I mean that's a good theory. That's a good
I don't
theory.
know.
So
So
okay,
are we ready to
I think we're ready
discuss?
to dive into State of Sony because we've got a lot to talk about. We don't have a slideshow today because work unfortunately got in the way, but
Our
we can
trip
still talk
planning.
about it. And you're gonna watch us googling on the fly, which actually may be the most entertaining thing of all.
What are they? What are they googling? Trying to figure out like what Brandon and what Kimber and Toby are trying to switch up real quick.
So, but okay, so Sony had two. I'm gonna say they just had two major bodies. There was that little APS-C vlogging camera thing. I don't even know if it was APS-C, but
I think it
I
is,
don't.
and I think it's it's like wasn't it like marketed as a content creation camera?
Yeah,
I think
ZV-1 or no, it's not the ZV-1. I thought
isn't
ZV-1
it
was several years ago.
ZB one?
I don't know.
Okay, now you can
That's
see the
that's how
googling game.
unimportant it was. So we have the FX30, which was a huge deal, and we have the A7R5. Those are the two huge camera releases from Sony this year, and I think both of them were huge deals, and both of them were. I mean, I think they were successes. I think there's been now that the industry is kind of settled post A7R5 announcement. I think there's been some disappointment that we've been kind of hearing about. Uh, so yeah.
Okay, so
Says your
sorry,
audio
not
is
to.
cracking there, Brandon.
Okay, oh sorry. Yeah, it's definitely the Wi-Fi. My apologies. I can't do anything about it though.
So
If you guys can hear me, it is the Sony ZV-E10. So,
oh, okay.
and it was
Sony.
released in August, I think. Point two.
Right. So we're having a bring on the Sony A9 III in 2023. I think. I mean, we're gonna get to that, but man, that is a camera. I think it's what Sony has. I mean, they have to do the A9 III, or they have to do. I mean, I don't think they're ready for the A1 Mark II. I actually don't know what they're going to put out in 2023. That's the biggest question mark I have, is what is coming out in 2023 as far as bodies.
I hope it's well, for Sony's sake, I hope it's the Sony A9 III. I think that could be such a cool body. They could make something that directly competes with the Canon R3. Put 6K 60 raw video. Well, Sony's not Sony's not really doing the raw game, but 6K 60 and 30 frames a second. Kind of have it compete with the A1, but in a different way, less megapixels. Maybe have it be 24, maybe 30.
I think it's got to be more than 24. I mean, like the R3 kind of got away with it, but just barely when it was released.
What do you be? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, I just think that an A9 III coming in at 24 megapixels again, like I guess it could be 30 frames a second instead of 20. I think that's a bad look.
What if it was?
I think it totally depends on everything else they build around a 24 megapixel sensor, because the A9 series has always been this strange thing, the A9 Mark I and the A9 Mark II, where it's almost like Sony is forcing that camera to be just a sports photographer's camera. I think a lot of that is probably protecting the at the time coming A1, because one of the things that the A1 has going for it is it's probably one of the best hybrid cameras ever made, between stills and video. It really is a do everything, whereas the A9 series has traditionally just given you the best of the best for sports and wildlife shooting. So I could honestly see the A9 III coming out. Yeah, weirdly like fine video, but they don't have like log profiles in it and stuff, which was theorized to be something wrong with the stacked sensor, but the A1 has it. So I could see the A9 III, especially based off of how minor the A9 II upgrade was. It could literally be just making sure that people who really want the A9 line of camera have the best autofocus, the new AI autofocus, and then maybe adding just a few of the body upgrades, like the new flip screen and maybe tossing in log profiles. And honestly, like, maybe this sounds silly, but for $4,500, that doesn't bother me really. Like, those are really needed updates, and a lot of people do like the lower resolution. But if they did all the things I mentioned and did a 30 megapixel sensor, or the 33 megapixel sensor that's in the A7 IV, that would be really cool. That would be a really powerful camera. But I don't know what I think it's going to be, because the A9 II was such a disappointment. Like, it changed next to nothing about the camera. It was it seemed like it was
body
like
update,
better colors, kind of.
Yeah,
it was something weird like that.
I mean, so hear me out here though. I think it's a little weird that you have, it just really clusters most of Sony's bodies, at the top. So then you have like the A7R5 at basically 4,000. Then you have the A9 III at 4,500, and then you have the A1 at 6,500. I feel like that's weird to have that many bodies in those kind of price brackets. Like, are there that many people buying there? Like, I feel like you should have more in the middle, like have like a 25, and then like a 3,800. Right.
They could make it $4,899, and then I think what they need to actually do with the A9 III is kind of show people what's going to happen with the A1 Mark II. So lesser megapixels, maybe slightly lesser other things. Maybe it's not gripped. Maybe Sony does go with the gripped A1 Mark II as they should, but I think they did really good video specs, great speed for stills, did 30, 30, 33, 36 megapixels, that would be an excellent way to kind of go down.
I like the sound of 36 megapixels. I think that could be a good spot to be in.
And then especially if they make the A1 Mark II 61 or more, or 80. I know that there's been a lot of talk about jumping to 80, 81 megapixels for Canon, but I would assume Sony would probably go there too, or they should be going there too.
Right. Right.
And then 36 to 81, that's enough of a difference that, it wouldn't cannibalize the system. Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
Toby.
Oh, no, you're good. So there is a couple other things that I don't know if they're exactly predictions, but they're things that probably need to happen. The A7C Mark II would be a 2023 release that I think would make a ton of sense. The A7C is going to be a rangefinder version of the A7 IV. So it shouldn't have really anything better. It should just be a little less expensive and more compact than the A7 IV. If they follow the same process they did with the A7C and the A7 III. So it's one of those things that it's probably a camera that will sell pretty well, but it's hard to anticipate there to be a lot of value in that camera as far as new features or anything like that is concerned. There appears to be a little bit of rumors that an A7S Mark IV may be coming next year.
Really?
According to Sony Alpha rumors.
Interesting.
They would wait 6 years, release the A7 III compared to the A7S II, and then they would just in a year, or I guess not a year, but in that short of a period, come out with a A7S IV.
Well, if we get all the way to the end of 2023, it would be 3 years. So it actually wouldn't be that long because it'd be 2020 to 2023. I think. Yeah, 2020 to 2023.
It was 2020. Yeah.
So here's a question then, Toby. What would I don't know if there are specs already leaked, but for you to switch from the Canon R5C, what would that camera need to have? Assuming it's still low megapixel, lowish.
So I'm actually going to not assume it's low megapixel because I don't see. So there's one really big elephant in the room spec they could add to a 12 megapixel camera like that. They could add 4K 240 frames per second. That would be like the A7S, but like we have the FX line, and I would assume that there'll be an FX and a Sony A7S line camera. I guess they're going to do that, and I think that what I'd like to see the Sony A7S do, and this is where it's like I don't quite see how it makes it be an amazing camera, but does it make sense in Sony's lineup? I'm not sure. But essentially, what we were just talking about with the A9 III, a 36 megapixel, just enough megapixels to give us 8K, and essentially make a R5C, but in the A7S line would be the biggest upgrade to go. Because we are looking at cameras like the R5C, the A1, the new Sony A7R5, the Canon R5. These cameras are shooting notably sharper images and maybe cleaner images too, especially easier to use images. I have a whole video on the A7S III and then a comparison of the A7 IV versus the S3 where I talk about some of the weirdness with the ISO. 12,800 is brilliant, but ISO 6400 is super noisy on that camera. So there could be some cleanup work done, but I think it's time to maybe move on, at least in one of their product lines, from the 12 megapixel sensor and give us something a little bigger than that.
What if I think maybe the play then for Sony is to merge the A7S IV into the A9 III. like merge those cameras.
I think that makes more sense. He has rumors for both. This is Sony Alpha Rumor Guy.
Mhm.
He's very not legitimate, as we all know. So keep that in mind, everybody.
I don't think that camera's going to happen. And I don't think he says, I've got info on a possible A7S4. Or he said, actually, excuse me, he says, I got no info about a possible A7S4, but maybe towards the end of the year, we will get an 8K A7S4 too. That's
I don't know how you can just make the assumption that like, oh, it could be possible. Like, sure, in like a
Well, I think that plays into the issue that we're looking at for Sony in that there's not, other than the A9 III, but like I think that the A9 III, because I was watching a video Jared Polin just put out, he doesn't think an A9 III is coming at all. So I'm like,
well,
there's no obvious camera. There's no obvious camera that Sony's coming out with in 2023, and I think that's what's weird.
There is, and he does point this out though. I think that in this article, the future of Sony cameras, he just posted it about 2 weeks ago. Do you think that this is a useful thing to go over though? Because Sony's got a lot of old product lines right now. The A6600 is over 3 years old. The A6100 is over 3 years old. The A9 II is over 3 years old. The S3 is 2 years and 4 months old. So by this time next year, it'll be 3 years and 4 months old. The A7C is also 2 years plus old, and the A1 is essentially 2 years old as well. So when you're just looking at all of these product lines, it's like, for example, the A6600 is now overpriced and outplayed by all the competition. It's just not as good of a camera as what Nikon has, as what Canon has, as what Fuji has, and it's not even close. Like,
right.
I used the A6600. I loved the A6600, but it's not in the same ballpark. And more or less the same thing is going to go for the A6100. I mean, like, that camera is like, it doesn't even have log profiles. Like, it's a messy camera, and they both just shoot 8-bit video. And then from a stills perspective, we're looking at all these camera companies have moved on to 30 megapixel, 40 megapixel sensors, still shooting at high frame rate. It's like Sony's APS-C game is weak, but Sony just released the FX30, which is an awesome video camera for APS-C at a really good price. It's the cheapest 4K 120 camera you can get. And it does shoot like 1080 240 and stuff. And they also released a significant number of nice Sony APS-C E-mount lenses this last year. I believe there was an 11 millimeter f1.8, a 16 millimeter f1.4, and a 10 to 20 millimeter f4 zoom, I believe, that had like a PZ thing on there. And then they did also release that vlog-centric camera as well, that kind of had similar specs to the older A6000 cameras, but with a few little tweaks. So it's like the iron is hot for Sony APS-C to do some work next year for sure.
I agree. I think and then I'd love for Sony to do something that, like, I know people have been asking for a long time. And that's a baby version of an APS-C version of the flagship. So do I don't know whether to call it an A10. I don't know, an A100. I don't know.
Could be an A6900.
The A6900, but like literally do it the same body as the A1. So like drop the rangefinder thing, make it a more professional-ish body like that. So you can take the same grip. Have very similar specs to the A1, maybe a 30 megapixel. I don't think you should go up to 50 megapixels in APS-C, but like have it be pretty good megapixel wise, but also be and then have it be $2,500 so for $2,500 you can get a super fast, brilliant sports, wildlife, kind of all around camera like that. And, it's not full frame, but that's, you have to pay for full frame. It's always been that way. And I think the industry has been asking for this for forever. Like baby A9, back in the day, and baby, and like for on Canon and Nikon. I mean, Canon and Nikon always flirted with that, like the D500 and the 7D series, but they never quite went all the way to being a baby flagship. But I think flagships are in. I think flagships are popular. They're selling like they've never sold before. They're the only kind of camera that's selling way more than it ever has in the past, right?
Well, and people like the features too, so that's a part of that too. Like features over maybe full frame.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. So I think, have it look just like the A1, and the major difference being that the A1 is full frame and a little bit higher megapixel, at 50. So have it be, I don't know, 40, 36, somewhere in there. I think we keep landing kind of at this 36 megapixel point. I think because, kind of 2023 forward, I think that's going to be the bare minimum. I think 33. I mean, now that Fuji's at 40, with its APS-C, I think like we can't be much lower than 30 anymore.
Yeah. Well, that would give Fuji a run for their money if that camera existed. Like, basically,
my gosh,
oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the name of the one they just came out with.
XH2S.
Yeah, so there's the XH2S is the video focused one that's $2,500. The XH2 is the 40 megapixel one that's $2,000. Then the XT5 also has 40 megapixels, but their retro body at $1,700. It is incredibly convoluted. And like, why have the XH2, I think, is my question, but we this isn't about Fuji. That's next week. Just kidding.
Are you? No, I don't know.
Well, and the thing is I think people would love that. People that like Fuji would eat that up immediately. Like Sony users that like Fuji, or people that are, weary about being in a Fuji system would love that camera.
Yeah, I just feel like there's a lot of people who would like to feel like they're getting a top of the line camera. It's like there's it's the iPhone Pro thing, right? So like you have the iPhone Pro and you have the iPhone Pro Max, right? And so the Z9, A1, R3, it's like the iPhone, 14 Pro Max, right? And then you have the Pro, which is like a smaller version but has the same feature set generally, right? And I think people would eat that up. I think people would be like, yeah, I don't need to, first off, I don't need to drop, $5,000-$6,000. But I would love to have like the same kind of body, the same kind of, general feature set. I just think that camera would be hugely popular, which may be the exact reason that Sony isn't doing it, is that they feel like there's people who would buy A1s, would buy that camera instead. But honestly, I don't know. Is that much of a downside?
I don't know. I think it's cheaper for them, so they might be able to have a higher, make more money off of it, even though it's technically less expensive. But I think like this could honestly solve a lot of Sony's problem with this. They need an S3 or an S line. They need an A9 III or A9, and then they need a APS-C camera. Like, what if they just kind of combine those into the same camera, and make it like whatever it is, like you were saying, like a A100 or whatever, but start a new line,
A10, that kind A100, something like that. Yeah.
And then give it kind of the best of all of those, like make it the best APS-C camera you can pretty much buy,
right?
And like and at some point people who have that camera will want full frame. But what they could do then, instead of putting some features in the A7S III, which I think they kept that exclusively for the A7S III and didn't put all of it into the A1, kind of. They could put
Not
all
much.
these features.
There was maybe a couple things.
There's some like RAW. I was thinking, does the A7S III have RAW in like internal RAW recording? I thought it did, but I could be wrong on that.
Does the
And
A7S III have internal raw recording? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
No, it does not. It has external raw recording. So that
Okay.
gets me to some commentary on. So right now, Sony to me, and if somebody disagrees with me in the comments, I'd be curious to have a conversation about it. I feel like Sony is slipping rapidly behind in the video game. And that's been a trend for a few years now, in that Sony's been releasing the meat and potatoes, what you absolutely have to have from a video perspective, but they haven't been innovating with new features. So a great example of this is the FX30, in that the FX30 is awesome. I like, it's great. It introduces nothing new. It's kind of fixing maybe some problems with rolling shutter and their APS-C line, and then bringing the price down of some of their higher end features, which all that kind of serves to do is makes the A7S III feel more pointless, the FX3 feel more expensive, the A1 feel less important, and in a lot of cases actually adding like quality of life stuff that kind of makes you almost feel like buying the more expensive camera is like dumber. Like the A7 IV here in front of me has this quick slow motion video photo switch, which means that my A7 IV that's $2,500 has custom modes for stills and for video, which is a huge professional feature, especially someone looking to
Huge
do
deal.
hybrid shooting
Huge deal.
might really want. But I can't have that on my A1 because they did that body upgrade on the A7 IV. And then the A7 IV also has a focus breathing compensation. So the A7 IV, I can use the brilliant 35 millimeter f1.4. I was getting to play with that just the other day and have no focus breathing issues. It does crop it in a little bit. You know, it's not exactly a 35, but like, this camera has features that are better than the A1, and then the A1 has features that are better than this camera. And, you know, right now, probably the best video camera hybrid, well, I guess it still is the A1. They've successfully protected it because it's full frame and it has 4K 120 and it also has 50 megapixels. But a lot of these quality of life features, I didn't even go through all of them. Like, Animal IF would be a great one to point out. This one has it. The A1 doesn't. That's a huge problem.
And that's in video. That's not for stills.
It's in video, right?
Now, I think stills wise, the body upgrades are the body upgrades, but I guess that's what you're saying, is that a lot of the stuff is video. I don't feel like they have quite the same issue for stills, other than some of the body upgrades. Like, the A7R5 is an objectively better body than the A1. Period. It just is. The fact that flip screen that they have on there.
Well, the A1 also maybe has. The A1 also maybe has. Excuse me. The A7R5 also maybe has better autofocus now than the A1 does, because they're not updating the A1's autofocus.
And it has more megapixels. So.
And I mean, it's still really, really fast. So it's kind of like, and this isn't exactly a behind the scenes thing. I'm interested in potentially looking at switching back to Sony for various different reasons. And I own a Sony camera. I'm part Sony. And I'm just really struggling to find, as a video shooter, keep that in the front of your head. As a video shooter, I'm having a hard time finding a combination that makes sense. Because in the end, the Z9, which is cheaper, actually has, it's a Nikon camera that actually has some of the features that I would be like, oh, I would really love to have X, Y, and Z in this camera. And I feel like right now with Sony's lineup, I think they need to release an A1 II next year. I think they need to. The rumors are saying more 2024. They're thinking more 2024, but the A1 is the weakest link in Sony. And if they turn that back into the God camera, everything slips into place better. Like the A7R5 makes more sense with its body upgrades and everything else. Like, yes, it's got more megapixels than the A1 II, maybe, depending what the A1 II ends up being. but everything slips into place then. The A7 IV makes sense because the A7 IV is kind of like a baby A7R5, and then the A7R5 is basically just a baby A1 II, and everything makes sense then. The S line gets to be whatever it is. The cinema line gets to do its thing, and then upgrade the APS-C camera. So I think it's A1 II and the APS-C cameras. That's what you need to release next year for Sony. And I think everyone's happy. Either that or beef up the A1 with firmware updates. Those are your
well,
choices.
but you have the A1 needs body upgrades because
it does need body upgrades.
The back screen is not only not a flip screen, it's not very high res. It is that old Sony one that they use for years and years. That is not good. So I mean, I was trying not to say this because you're right. I mean, like now that I'm actually thinking it through, it's kind of the only option. It really is to have it all make sense. Now, I kind of highly doubt that the A1 II is coming. I don't know. I mean, but Sony surprised us before with stuff like that. The A7R3 came before we thought. Honestly, the A7 II came before we thought. So, you know, it's possible.
I think the other option is still a A9 that is more competitive with the Canon R3. I think that could be a way of them patching it for a second. A 30 megapixel or a 36 megapixel A9 III that is full frame, has a lot of video rich features, all the new body upgrades, and actually body upgrades that really like play into what the A1 will have. So I think if Sony did like a gripped A9 III with 36 megapixels and like just really good video features.
I mean, I hear where you're coming from. I don't think it solves it though, because then the A1 starts to make even less sense than it already does.
Well, and this is if they do come out with an A1 or 2 a year after this or something like that. Like let that be kind of in the spotlight for a second, and then yeah, that's my thought process with it. Obviously, all this stuff they can't just flip a switch and be like, oh yeah, in like 6 months we're gonna have a camera that has all this R&D that takes 4 years to do. Like I don't know, it's just unrealistic, but still.
Well, and the A9 III, they could just take it in a new direction. He doesn't. The rumors that are saying it's coming have no specs. They haven't given him any specs. I just wouldn't be surprised if Tony Northrup, if Jared Polin is right, and this camera is just not really coming. That being said, like what worries me for Sony a little bit is that the A9 III is coming, and it's just a patch camera for the people that use the A9 series and love it, for shooting weddings and sports. And that's what it is. It's to put the new AF system in there. It's to give it the new body updates. And they're just planning to do that for the A9 III because the A9 II is much, much older than the A1. So it's time for the A9 III to get its upgrade. And people are disappointed again because it's $4,500 or $4,700 or whatever. And it's just serving that same niche. Great camera, because I think Sony's been releasing great cameras. The A7 IV does its niche's job really well. The A7R5 does its niche's job really well. And I think that what's starting to happen is Sony's getting a little bit, what's the right word? It's running into problems with its design ethos of creating specialized cameras, because Canon and Nikon are not doing that. They're creating do everything cameras that aren't specialized, and maybe Canon in particular right now, but the Z9 is a great example of Nikon doing that.
Yep.
And Sony is still thinking about things from this perspective of, well, the A7R series is the camera that has high resolution, so we're going to make sure that it's the best high resolution camera it can be. And in that case, like, it makes total sense. Prove the AF. I mean, regardless of what we've said here, 2 years ago, Kemper reviewed the Sony A7 R4, and the main thing that he talked about was, man, if the AF was better, this camera would be better. And they fixed the AF. They made it a more stable.
So true.
They made it a more stable operating system with an updated stabilization, and they
Mhm.
just made a camera that's going to be able to flex 61 megapixels better for the people that need that. And the A7S line, they did the same thing. And I feel like what doesn't look so good is Sony's no longer bringing out like these crazy specs. It's like everyone could have forgiven the A7R5 if it had 100 megapixels, even if it still didn't even shoot 4K 60. Like no one cares. Everyone's just talking about this crazy new spec that they added.
Mm.
And
And that's what Sony rode for
yeah.
years and years, is that it was like, whoa, what did Sony just do? And they haven't done that for a minute.
That's what the A7R3 did, honestly. And then I don't know. Sony seems to do two things. They do seem to listen to their customers, but then they also seem to be, half step behind when they do that. They come out with the camera first, but then it's like, the A7R5. I mean, I don't know if it's arguably first because the Canon R5 was also in that lineup, but they come up with a new high megapixel camera first, bunch of cool features, fixes the problems that people had with the A7R4. But then they drop the ball on the megapixels, or they drop the ball on the video specs, or they drop the ball on something that's, they probably see it as small, but the users are like, wait, what? Why doesn't it have this?
Right.
And
exactly.
I think that's Sony's problem. Like, it's good. I'm glad they're listening to Camper's problem with the autofocus not being up to par for 61 megapixels.
Right.
They fixed that. They did not fix, well, maybe it's not even a fix, but they did not keep up with, the trends, I guess. Maybe
in a lot of ways they didn't. And I feel like the other elephant in the room is that their body design is behind. And I feel like it's past due for, I think when people saw the A7R5 and they saw that it looked exactly like the A7R4, like I said, not exactly, but generally speaking, it's a very, very small tweaks to the A7R4 and the A1 and the A7, and it really looks like the A7 IV, right? Almost indistinguishable if you don't see the little hinge thing, right? And I feel like they underestimate, I think that the Z9 got a lot of hype for the way that it looks. Like, it's like, oh wow, it looks so cool, that big gripped body. And I'm not saying everybody wants a gripped body. I think people do want something that looks new. Maybe it's shallow, and it is shallow, but also it's an opportunity to make it better and improve and tweak.
It's ergonomics though too. It's not just a looks thing. And Canon and Nikon went at the same thing in two different ways. Canon made a bigger, better in hand body, but it's really, really light. It's basically the same weight as the R5, isn't it? Ish,
yeah,
pretty close.
It's pretty close. It feels the same.
Yeah, so it's
that could be just perceptual.
Way bigger than an R5, but it's about the same weight either way. Nikon did a smaller but slightly heavier, which is still okay, but retro body that looks good, feels good in the hand, and it's two different thoughts on the same process. But Sony has literally left the A1 feeling like closer to the R3, at least the R4.
The A7R4, yeah. The similarity on the names, I really wish that they would get out of that business, but that's not going to end anytime soon.
That's why we need an A93.
Yeah.
Switch it up completely. Start a new line.
Yeah, I think that with the body thing, I just think that there's definitely an ethos within Sony of keeping things small. They've said that before. I mean, Sony said a lot of things I haven't held to, like we're not abandoning A mount. Well, that didn't.
Yeah.
No, that was a good one. They're good on that. I can forgive them for that a million times.
They're fine. It's just they made a big point. I remember right after the A99 II was released, they're like, yeah, we're totally not abandoning this, and then never released anything else for
the A mount. Yeah.
Which is fine. That's, no one's upset about that, I don't think. Oh, there's that one guy, but he's the only one who ever used it in the first place. But
Right, exactly.
The one person they made it for.
And so I'm not saying that they won't reverse this mentality, but Sony thinks it's really important still. And maybe this is a holdover from being the first to mirrorless. And really, what everyone talked about with mirrorless was it's going to be smaller and lighter than DSLRs. That's what everyone was fixated on. And exactly why
For
that
a
was
long
to
time.
this day, I still don't entirely get it. I mean, the DSLR is a big camera, but it's not like that big. Like, I don't know.
Right.
Anyway, people were upset about the size of the cameras and they thought mirrorless, literally, it was just mirrorless is going to make things smaller. Great. And you can see Sony is still buying into that. And Canon and Nikon seemed to understand that. I don't know that this is, I think some people would say the size thing is a big deal and they love Sony for that. So I can't necessarily say this universally, but I think it's pretty clear that Canon and Nikon are like, yeah, we can make them 30% smaller, maybe, but that's all we're going to do.
I was going to say that.
And they're focused on the lens benefits and the fact that you have an electronic viewfinder, which is huge. And people don't like talking about it, but previewing your exposure, being able to put exposure tools and focus, being able to punch in on your image, being able to review images in the viewfinder,
having your autofocus point anywhere on the frame, you know,
exactly, having it on sensor AF. I mean, there's huge advantages to mirrorless that have nothing to do with the size of the cameras, and Canon and Nikon seem to be like, yeah, this is what we're going to do. And we're just going to flex all of this stuff. And Sony is flexing all that stuff, to Sony's credit, but they're still maintaining that the small body thing is really important.
Well, and then
I guess we'll
physics
see if
is
that's
an issue, right?
important.
Physics is an issue. Like, you know, a 2.8 lens or whatever, you know, can only be so small, right? Or an f2, I mean, an f1.2 lens can only be so small. And honestly, I feel like they got the 51.2 really small. Like,
That
you know, it's great.
That might be my favorite lens. Like, in terms of just, you know, some higher thing of just how perfect they made that lens. Like, the smallest, really good autofocus. Like, I can't say I like it maybe more practically than the 28 to 70 f2 from Canon, but like something about the 51.2 from Sony is just like they did a miracle with it. So
right.
Because,
and I think that you're kind of hitting on a point that I think has to be addressed with Sony, in that, you know, Sony for a long time was riding on the fact that they were the big mirrorless boy in town. And it got them to where they're now the second biggest camera company. Like they've caught up and passed Nikon, generally speaking. And for a long time, that was their thing, is that we, you know, we're first to the mirrorless game. We're best at the mirrorless game. And I think what happened in 2022 is that Canon and Nikon have quietly caught up. Generally, I don't think Nikon's 100% caught up. The Z9, if the Z9 exists in a vacuum, then yeah, they have, but their whole lineup hasn't. But we could talk about that. But generally speaking, Canon and Nikon are direct competitors now. They have same tech to similar tech. They have, you know, similar bodies. So, you know, we're not talking about the A7R4, excuse me, the A7R3 versus the D850 anymore, where one was mirrorless and one wasn't. And it's like, well, one is obviously the future, right?
Yeah.
It's not that anymore. And I think for Sony, they're going to have a little bit of they're going to have to think about where they go from here, because like Canon and Nikon, it's like it's neck and neck, and Canon's next release or Nikon's next release, theoretically, you know, can pass Sony. You know, they're now in the same game that Canon and Nikon were in for years and years and years and years. And I wonder how Sony's going to handle it. You know, are they going to kind of do the same thing that Canon and Nikon do, where I feel like, you know, if you look at the history of Canon and Nikon, I think for a lot of years, they were content with like, okay, Nikon's top for a minute. and then okay, Canon's top for a minute, and then it just kind of flip flops and goes through. Or is Sony really going to try to catch, like really, overtake them? Which I think for a minute it looked inevitable. It looked like Sony was going to completely take over the industry, and it's leveled out. It's flattened. That growth curve is flattened, I think, as far as how it's dominating the industry, because you have things like the Z9 where people are like, this is really interesting what Nikon's putting out, and you had the Canon R5 a couple of years ago. This was really interesting what Canon was putting out. So I'm just curious. I don't feel like I don't know that I have good advice for Sony. If Sony would listen to advice from me, I don't know. I think they need to redesign. I think they need an updated design. I think people need to feel like something really new comes out from Sony. So it's not just new spec wise, it's new all the way around. I think that would be huge for Sony. They could do things with the interface. I'd love to see them, I'd love to see a camera company really embrace the touchscreen, the huge touchscreen life. Make it like, a third
like a phone,
or
maybe.
like, almost like a phone. Have the back be like the size of a phone, like mounted on the back. I think people are ready to have a lot of the controls be on a touch screen. And we talked about this in the Canon video with the R1 maybe doing that, but maybe Sony's the one who does that. I don't know.
Well, if they're a tech company, they should be the ones to do that. I feel like. I mean, I don't know. Sorry, I didn't mean to just barge in like that.
No, please barge in. Like, I'm curious what you guys think, because like it just feels like Sony's at this awkward moment where they're realizing, hey, we're not the only the big mirrorless dog in town anymore, because they're very much not. Canon and Nikon are right there. And I would argue that like Canon's lens lineup, and to some degree Nikon's, like for instance, Nikon's 24 to 120 is vastly superior to Sony's 24 to 105. It's if you're a regular user of that kind of focal range, Nikon's is better enough that I would consider, getting a Nikon Z7 and putting that on it or something, because, Sony's isn't. So there are areas where Sony, and Sony's having to release Mark IIs of some of their lenses to kind of catch up. And granted, those Mark IIs are amazing. The 2470 and 7200 Mark IIs are amazing. But
I will say, I think that one's a little more forgivable, because when they came out with their Mark Ones, they were a pretty young camera company. Like, in terms of mirrorless and everything they had to do, the E-mount is also specifically pretty small. Like, Canon and Nikon both have larger mounts, which makes it easier to engineer glass for.
It's totally forgivable. It's totally forgivable, but like, think about it this way. They're having to spend a lot of R&D time and money on updating things that they've already put out versus R&D time on money in the latest and greatest new innovation,
Yeah, well,
that's a huge difference. And that's something that's a reality that Canon and Nikon have been dealing with for years,
Well, that's what I thought Canon was doing backwards at first. They came out with all these like super cool lenses. I was like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. They have a 51.2 and 85.1.2 significantly before Sony did. The 28 to 70 f2. And I was just kind of like, well, there's no camera body to put it on. That's very odd. But now Sony is stuck on maybe the same but opposite side of that, where it's like, okay, cool. Sony doesn't have some of this glass. They're having to release Mark IIs. And now they're slowing down with their camera game. So it's like almost, I guess, more like a double-edged sword on that plane. But
yeah.
Kind of a rough spot.
So we've talked a lot about camera bodies, and before we kind of wrap up, because we've already been talking about this for an hour, but we should probably talk. I mean, like what made, I'm trying to think, the 2470 2.8 came out, the Mark II came out in 2022. That was a big deal because I tried out that lens. It's a fantastic lens. Like, yeah, so good. What else? What other lenses came out? I'm trying to think.
The new 70 to 200, if it wasn't this year, it was very late last year.
It was late last year, yeah, which is also an amazing lens.
They released those APS-C lenses. They I'm not totally sure what else. It was kind of a quiet year for everybody in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
This year, but the Sony A7R5, that probably was the release of the year, biggest camera release of the year.
Yeah.
And
it was a good release.
It's a good camera.
I think it wasn't the home run I think maybe it could have been, but
yeah, it's hard to know. It's hard to know why. The thing that's tough is it's like from a still photographer's perspective, I think it's actually because we talked about the Canon R5 versus the A7R5, and we were pretty hard on the Sony A7R5, and I think justifiably so. The thing is the A7R5 from a stills photographer perspective, it's creating better images than the Canon R5 is creating. And in theory has better autofocus, and in theory has some of these things that are just overall better. And I think that's it's just hard that there's nothing in it that's exciting. There just really is nothing in it that's exciting. It's like, here's an A7R4 with the video patched and the autofocus patched, and that's great. And it's a super powerful tool to create stuff with. But I just think if I had advice for Sony, do something exciting, do something we haven't seen before. Like it feels like it's been since the A9 original, and then, releasing the stacked sensor thing, the no shutter game changer thing, since we've had something from Sony, or when they released the Sony A7 III that just blew everyone's minds with the AF performance and the flexibility at the price. Like,
right.
I want to see that from Sony more, in that they changed the industry. They created the future and put it in people's hands years before anyone else had it. And now it just feels like, well, it's kind of feels like the other companies are creating, particularly maybe Canon in particular right now, are almost taking your ideas and creating better stuff. It's like, I want to see Sony do something where it's like, wow, like we have the future now. Whether that's 100 megapixel full frame camera or something like that. And maybe as we get to know this new autofocusing system and Sony gets to do some firmware updates, maybe we'll feel that way about the new autofocusing system in the A7R5. It
Problem
could be,
is that autofocus in cameras is like, it's going to be so incremental at this point in improvement, right? That like it's going to be hard to tell, one from the other. I mean, because honestly, the autofocus in the A1 was so good, and then you have the R3, the Canon R3 being maybe slightly better or whatever, but all of it at this point, all the autofocus coming out is amazing. So I don't know how autofocus is going to be that thing anymore that's going to blow minds, because it's at this point, I think people expect the world from it anyway. But it focuses on the eyes of animals, which is something a few years ago, who would have thought?
Or the eyes of people. That one was, I mean, that's changed.
Even that. I mean, that's not even been 10 years since that has been a thing. And it's so.
And looping back to Sony, they did that first.
They did.
Like the Sony A7R3, and these was in particular, I think, was where they really honed that in to be really good and reliable.
And it's like that was. I think it was.
It might have been in the R2. I don't remember if it was like was the autofocus in general reliable in the Sony A7R2. That's the real question.
Oh, that's the real question. But it was in there. I think it was in there.
It was in there. It's like that kind of thing. That kind of thing is what I want to see. So honestly, what I want to see from Sony is surprise me, do something exciting and fun. And I just don't feel like we've gotten anything exciting. I mean, even the A1, incredible camera, one of the best cameras ever made, hands down. It was a polished version of the Canon R5 6 months later. Yeah, that's not a great look.
Yeah.
Well,
and it's a fine look in that there wasn't anything wrong with it, but there also wasn't anything right with it. Exactly. I mean, sure, 50 megapixels at 30 frames per second that's a lot to have right. But
it's like I'll backtrack a little bit.
that's
Well,
also a
but that's
very
true. I mean,
specific thing.
and that also that
Oh,
doesn't
yeah.
change the industry, right? In that, I mean, I think people like the idea of that, but so few professional photographers actually need that. It's a very niche thing. Whereas like eye autofocus, that's something anyone who takes photographs can use. It's a huge deal. And
Mhm.
I think I hear what you're saying is like, where's the feature that changes the entire photographic industry? Because 30 frames a second is mind blowing, but it doesn't change the photographic industry at all. You know,
Well, we had such high hopes for whatever random feature we were wanting to get. Like, we're like in the R5 before it came out, we were like, oh, is it going to have 16-bit RAW? Is it going to have, some insane video spec? And it's like, they passed up that insane feature. I kind of was really wishing it was going to be 16-bit RAW. That was going to be such a cool thing. But, if they did something like that, smack a smartphone on the back of it, oh, yeah.
yeah,
Sorry,
I
I'm
mean,
reading.
I don't know about a smack a smart. Well, I mean, yeah, I think that
Kind
could be
of.
super super cool. I think
Well,
100 megapixels. I mean, that ceiling, the 100 megapixel ceiling is a big deal. I think that someone is going to release a 100 megapixel full frame camera, and I think people will flock to it. I think that, like, as a landscape photographer, whoever goes there first, it's going to be hard for me to not be drawn there, because 100 megapixels, more megapixels, as a landscape photographer, it's like, it's a huge deal.
yeah.
But so I think that that's one of those glass ceilings. I think yeah, I'm trying to think. I had a thought while we were here talking, is that it would be interesting to see them do um C versions of some of their other cameras. I think like an A7RC could be interesting, and that would maybe open them up if they kind of get a reliable compact rangefinder line. That may allow them to release bigger bodies for their like main bodies. So
That's
I
it.
could see them doing like an A7RC, that's the A7R5, but a little more compact. It probably doesn't have all the overheating stuff, meaning it probably may overheat a little easier or something. But I think I could see that being, and then that gives them the option of going ahead and putting out that slightly bigger, beefier body, in their bigger cameras. I mean, in
No, I
their
love
like
that idea.
the main versions. And I think
Yeah.
landscape photographers would love an A7RC, like the thought of a very compact rangefinder but super high res body.
Well, and be a great second camera, like especially for landscape photographers, where they're like, "Oh, I like my big, A7R5 or A7 6 when it comes around." But I love that I have, for traveling or vacations or whatever, my compact little A7R6 theoretically, for
Yeah.
whatever that's
So
worth. But
I think that for me, Sony is the most interesting of the companies going into 2023 to see what they're going to do, because I straight don't know. I think I see where Canon's going, I see where Nikon's going. I don't feel like I see for sure where Sony's going, but it could be really cool. It could be, I don't know. It's just going to be interesting.
I'm excited
I
because.
just Oh no, go
Sorry,
ahead.
go ahead. I was just gonna say I'm excited to see what Sony does, because it could go all the way up to being like, something we have no idea what they're gonna do. Like in a good way, like unexpected. Sony's pulled a couple things in the past where it's like, wait, where did this come from? But then at the same time, that also isn't guaranteed by any means. Canon, we know, will release something. Sony might just
Right.
kind of, dud out, honestly. Like, we don't know. Like, that's,
I mean, I don't know.
yeah.
I mean, there's certain cameras like we know are coming. It's just like, when are they coming? The Sony A7R6
All
is coming.
theoretical.
The Sony A1 Mark II is coming, right? Like these are cameras that are coming. The A9 series, I could see that being dead. I could see the S line not continuing. But there's going to be more cameras. I think that the problem for Sony is I think that another year like this, like 2022, and honestly kind of like 2021 before it, and kind of 2020 before that, kind of since the A1 came out.
The A1 was early 2021, right?
Early 2021, January 2021,
I think. Yeah.
I just feel like if they have more years like this, people are they're going to lose their reputation for being the cutting edge and having the best tech. I think they still have that reputation among a lot of photographers and videographers. Even if you look at it and you're like, Canon and Nikon caught up, it's like Sony spent a long time getting the reputation for being the best mirrorless camera out there. And I think a lot of people still hold that perspective. So I think that Sony's bought themselves patch cameras. They bought themselves time to do it, but you've done it. You've patched your cameras. You've got your A7 IV. You've got your A7R5. You've got these cameras that do everything really, really well. But now it's time to do something fun again. Like, I don't know what that looks like, but maybe a 40 megapixel A9 III with like a new body we haven't thought of before, or implementation of certain, like more than just trickling down features, but like give us something new and exciting, like 100 megapixels or an 80 megapixel A2 or something that's just like, wow, like now I'm really motivated to switch. And
like an
now
RS could be really cool, or not RS, but you know, like I'm thinking of Canon, how they did something where if Sony came out with a A7R5 high megapixel version,
like higher,
maybe it loses some of the video specs in that for some reason. I don't know why that would be necessary, but you know, add a $500 extra, you know, bump in price, and then have it be 100 or 81 or, you know, whatever megapixels. Like even that could be really cool for 2023.
It could be cool.
Yeah.
Yep. I agree. I mean, I think that's well stated that they're putting their reputation on the line if they have another year in 2023 that looks a lot like 2022. And that could get even worse depending on, we don't know for sure what the R5 Mark II, we don't know for sure what the Z8 is going to look like. But the truth is that Sony's kind of opened themselves up to those cameras being kind of big blows to them. And that's, I honestly am a little surprised to even see Sony in this position based on kind of what they were like a few years ago. But like you said, if they hit the market with 100 megapixel something, or if they do something along those lines, or just, you know, anything, like you said, that's a super fun new thing, they're right back, you know, they're right back where they always have, is like, well, Sony brings it out first.
If it's one, like they need one camera, honestly. That's the thing. Like, I mean, Canon changed it with one camera. Sony can bring it back with one camera.
No joke. So. All right. Well, I guess we should go ahead and wrap up. We will see about if we're able to do a live show from California next week. That's going to entirely depend on if we have good reception. If not, we're going to do one more show before the end of the year, kind of going over, I think, kind of our awards for the year, kind of what we think the best of the year was, and then maybe a few predictions of other predictions. Although I think these shows have definitely, if you watched these, you know what we think is going to happen in 2023. Which, when it comes to Sony, we have no idea. But I think, and I think we are going to share some of our favorite shots that we got over the last year. I think that'll be a lot of fun. So
you guys can guess what cameras.
So anyway, we really appreciate everyone who tuned in, and we'll see you on the next adventure.
See you on the next adventure. Peace.
Bye.
Bye.